Over the last couple of weeks, I had traveled with Dick's butler often enough at night to pick up a sense of how he worked. He had a contact in every club we visited. Of course, he had not recruited them. He had not been in Berlin long enough, and his German was inadequate for such a purpose. But his job put him on the scene. He served as a cutout between two of our case officers at headquarters and those of our petty German agents who could speak English. If Dix enjoyed full cover from one of our business subsidiaries, presenting himself to the natives as an American executive from an import brewery, just call me a beer salesman, putsy. The staff at the boîtes we visited had small illusion clouding their clear Berlin minds that Dick's butler, cover name Randy Huff, for Sam Huff, the New York Giants linebacker, was anything but one more species of CIA man. The axiom that intelligence officers and agents must be kept apart, inculcated in me throughout training, did not, as Dix warned, seem to apply to this milieu. Not only was he highly visible, but anyone who talked to him would come under suspicion from Germans who were anti-American. Since his agents did not seem to mind, I was certain most of his people had been doubled by the East Germans. Dix, however, was without concern. It oughtn't to work, but it does, he said. I get more information from my boys than any other officer, CIA or West German, working these streets. It's tainted. You'd be surprised. A lot of agents are too lazy to lie. They end up telling more than they're planning to. They know I can shake it from them if I have to. Dix, I began. Huff, he said, is the name. Randy Huff. Everything I said that you get from them is at the least steered by the West Germans. Put away the book. My people are earning a living. They're street stuff. Of course, West German intelligence runs them. You don't think the BND would encourage us to get down and dirty with any kraut that didn't belong to them first? It's a comedy. Everybody is paying for information. The British, the French, the West Germans, the Soviets. We happen to be paying the most, so our job is the easiest. Take the subway and go over to East Berlin, to Café Warsaw. That's the place where they all hang out, agents, informers, contact men, cutouts, couriers, principals, even Russian and American case officers. Rodents go scurrying from table to table, looking for the best price. West Berlin may be a spy market, but get it straight, buddy, East Berlin is a bigger joke. Everybody is doubled and tripled. You can't even remember if they're supposed to be yours or theirs. And you know, it doesn't matter. They make up the stuff if they don't have it. Aren't you concerned that the East Germans are polluting your input? The SSD can't begin to pay what we do. Besides, I know who's working for them, and I know what to feed them. He was bored with this. Just as bored as any lawyer giving legal information to his friends on Sunday. Forget it, Charlie Sloat, which happened to be my cover name at the Department of Defense desk. Just look at that redhead over there. We were in the Ballhaus Resi, at a corner of Grafenstrasse, and I'm afraid it is exactly that legendary place where telephones sit on every table. You can call a woman across the room by dialing her table number. The process worked equally well in reverse, and our phone kept ringing. Women wished to speak to Dix. He was executive and cut off any female who could not converse in English. For those able, the advanced course was waiting. Angel, he would say, wave your hand so I'm certain I know who I'm speaking to. A blonde lady across the room would now wag her finger into the smoke. You're fabulous, he would tell her. Don't thank me. It's the truth. All this while, he would be drumming his knuckles on the table. Helga, a nice name. And you say you are a divorcee. Good for you. Could you answer a question, Helga? Yes? Would you care to fuck? Don't you get slapped a lot? I asked him once. Yes, he said, but I get laid a lot. If Helga hung up, he would shrug. One dried-up wildcat. What if she'd said yes? I might have lubricated her screech. Women did not always say no. He made dates for later. Sometimes he kept such dates. Sometimes his mood turned bitter at the very idea of women. He'd get to his feet, and we would move to another club. At Remdi's on Kantstrasse, the categorical imperative was to obtain a ringside table and use the fishing poles furnished by the management to lift pieces of loose clothing from the stripteasers. Homage to Immanuel Kant. We'd drop into the bathtub on Nürnberger Strasse, a cellar pit for jazz, then onto the Kelch in Prager Strasse. There were a great many men dressed as women. I hated that. Hated it with all the Puritanism lurking in the family blood. But Butler enjoyed it. Then we would move on. He was always in conversation, a hand on a girl's hip, a piece of paper going into his pocket from a waiter, a whisper from the hat-check girl, a quick notation in his pad, which he ostentatiously tore off to send to the bartender. Seeing how displeased I was at his technique, he began to laugh. "Go back to the manual on black propaganda," he said. "That bartender is working for the East Krauts, pure SSD. I want to embarrass him." So it went. One night out offered enough excitement to fire my fantasies for a month. Yet I went along on his rounds several times a week. I had never had such a sense of ferment in myself. I did not know if we were in a cellar or a zoo. Life was promising precisely because life had become dark and full of evil. We were in West Berlin and surrounded by communist armies on all sides. We might live for a day or a century, but vice twinkled like lights in an amusement park. One night, a middle-aged waiter said to me, "You think this is something new?" I nodded. "It is nothing," he said. On impulse, I asked, "Was more going on when the Nazis were here?" The waiter looked at me for quite a while. Yes," he said. "It was better then." I was left wondering how it was better. At far-off tables, people might be depressed, but around us a fever was rising. Dix's physical presence was never more overpowering than at 1 a.m. in a Berlin club. His features, merry and cruel, his blond hair, his height, his physical force, his clear-cut lust for plunder, must have spoken to that other victorious time when the dream of godlike power, imbued with pagan magic, lived in many a Berliner's mind. Dix always looked as if he had never been in a better place at a more appropriate time. One might have supposed that with the number of women who came his way, I would have caught some of the overflow. But as I soon discovered, I was not ready. I had never been in so many situations to point out how terrified I was of women. I had always thought it was the best-kept secret of my life. I had even managed to hide it from myself. Now I was obliged to recognize that I was afraid of young ladies who looked no more than 14, and of women remarkably preserved at 70, and we need not speak of the spectrum between. To know that some of these working girls, divorcees, single women, and wives on the loose, wanted me, aroused the same kind of panic I used to feel in my first years at the Buckley School when I did not know how to fight. Now it seemed to me as if sex were the fiercest human transaction of them all. One gave away large parts of oneself in order to receive one knew not what, and the woman could walk off with your jewels, your spiritual jewels. I exaggerate my fear in the hope to explain it. When a woman sat next to me on these nights, I felt the most abominable, if well-concealed panic. Something in my soul seemed about to be stolen. I might give away secrets God had entrusted to me. This was even more devout, I must admit, than the Episcopalianism imbibed at St. Matthew's on the true force of Christ, courage, and responsibility. On the other hand, I still felt competitive toward Dix Butler. I don't know if it was the cold showers of prep school, or the sinews in the family synapses, but it irked me not to be able to enter the lists against him on the field of female conquest. I wanted to be able to boast that I would yet be more of an artist at making love than Mr. Randy Huff, but the Hubbard common sense was also in my way. One reason I had until now been able to evade these terrors was the simple fact that in college I'd spent my time paying attention to girls who for one reason or another were never available. This ironic light was now obliged to be cast as well on my love for Kittredge. A trap door had been opened to my dungeon. I hardly wished to come face to face with the depth of the problem now, yet to face the portrait I like to keep of myself as a young, well-balanced CIA officer. I had to put some face, however, on this obvious rejection of all the women who came my way. Any tale I might offer to the effect that I wished to stay faithful to a girl back home would open me to every harassment in Dix Butler's book. So I told him I had a venereal disease. "Clap," I muttered. "You'll be all right in a week." "It's a strain resistant to penicillin." He shrugged. "Every time I caught a dose, I'd get evil," he told me. "I used to love sticking it in a woman, drip and all." He fixed me with a look. There was, as always, an extraordinary light in his eye when he talked about how low he was. He never looked more splendid than at such times. You know, that was when I would try my damnedest to get into respectable women's pants. I loved the idea I was passing on my infection. "Do you think I'm crazy?" It was my turn to shrug. "I attribute it," he said, "to the fact that my mother left my father and my brother and me when I was 10 years old. My father was one hell of a drunk. Used to beat the bejesus out of us. But when we got older, we would count up how many of Dad's bitches we fooled around with behind his back. I hated those bitches for never providing me with one good mother." Dix mixed pleasure with official rounds and charged off his personal bar bills. When he offered to put in for my expenses as well, I refused. The rules he broke were not there for me to bend. From the attitude of the more sober officers I'd worked with, it took no wise man to see that unauthorized use of one's expense account would be a bad debit to get listed on one's 201. We had signed up to cheat our enemies, not our own folk. Dix acted, however, as if his status were privileged. He showed more disregard for rules than anyone in the CIA I had encountered so far. On the night I spent with my father in Washington, I talked about Dix, but Cal was not impressed. "One like him comes up every month from the farm," he remarked. "A few get through. Most go down in flames." "He's exceptional," I told my father. "Then he'll end up running a small war somewhere," Cal replied. I was interrupted from thinking of this conversation when Dix remarked, "What's on your mind tonight?" I was not about to confess it was the assignment to unmask KU cloakroom. I merely smiled and looked around the Bauhaus Raisi. What a polyglot of human resources. I had never seen so many people with odd faces. Of course, to be a Berliner was not unequal to having one's features set at a slant. The collective physiognomy was reminiscent of the sharp edges on a cabinet maker's tools, not to speak of the entrepreneurial glint you could find in the dullest eye. The band at one end of the dance floor had the mien of musicians who have played through the burning of the Reichstag, the death of von Hindenburg, the rise and fall of Adolf Hitler, the Allied bombardments, the occupation, the Berlin airlift, and they had never had to change expression. They were musicians. In 10 minutes the set would be over, and they could smoke or go to the bathroom. That was more meaningful than history. Now, having played their way through such American hits as Doggy in the Window, Mr. Sandman, and Rock Around the Clock, which last succeeded in chasing even the most libidinous of the bourgeoisie off the floor, I was thinking that only prosperous Germans with stiff collars could bring to vice the dignity of a serious pursuit. The band moved on to an Umpah waltz with a tuba. That, in turn, swept all the wildly dressed young criminal element back to their tables, plus all the younger women with pink and purple wigs. The telephone rang at our table. An American girl across the room wanted to talk to Dix. She had dialed his number on the assumption that he was German. "Hello, honey," he said. "You got it wrong. I'm an American. But that's all right. We can still fuck. I'm coming over. I want to learn what kind of yo-yo talks like you. She was big and fair, with large features and a rangy body. By any gross measure of animal husbandry, with the shades of Nazi nightlife dictating my thoughts, she would have made an appropriate mate for him. Her name was Susan Blaylock Pierce, and she had gone to Wellesley and was working in the American consulate. In addition to the beer exporting enterprise, Dix had additional cover from state, but when he chose to speak of working there, Susan Pierce needed no more than 5 minutes to poke through his qualifications. Well, Randy Huff, or whatever your name is, I will tell you, somebody over at the consulate must be sick and tired by now of looking at your empty desk. I'm just a field hand, ma'am, he said. I could see she was his choice for tonight. She had a horsey laugh and argued doggedly with him about the merits of English saddle over Western. Who wants to look at some big slob slumped over a horse, she said. Some people need an animal for work instead of to show off their ass, lady. You, she said, should have been a little ogre with warts. He loved that. Marks of status rang in his mind like a cash register. I heard the bell sound for Wellesley and for Susan Blaylock Pierce. He surprised me, however, by his next gambit. Would you care to hear a long story about me, he asked. No. Lady, cut me some slack. This story is special. All right, but not too long, she said. At the age of 15, Dix declared, I was in excellent shape. I lied about my age to get into the Golden Gloves in Houston, and I won my weight division. Sub-novice. I hardly drank. I ran 6 miles a day. I could do one-arm chin-ups, one-arm push-ups. Susan, name me a feat, I could perform it. I could have run for president of my sophomore class in high school if I wasn't from the wrong end of everything you ever saw. But I was happy. I was going with a blonde girl who had blue eyes and 15-year-old plump little turn-up tits. When Susan Pierce showed her annoyance, he said, Don't be offended. They were innocent, those tits. Weren't even all sure what they were there for. I loved that girl, Cora Lee, and she loved me. It was beautiful. He took a sip of his drink. One night I broke training to take Cora Lee to our big dance hall, Laney's, to show her off. She had to be the prettiest girl there. Laney's was always jammed with the best riffraff, equal to some of the lower element here. Funky place. You could no sooner leave your girl alone than put a piece of meat on a plate and ask somebody else's dog not to look at it. But I didn't mind if I had a fight, and I sure wanted a beer. I hadn't had a drink in a month, training, so I was thirsty. I placed Cora Lee on a bench and said, Honey, don't let any man sit down next to you. If they want to give trouble, tell them to watch out for Randy Huff. Then I left her and went to the bar and bought 2 cans of beer. Since I had my own church key, I told the bartender not to open them. I brought those cans back ice cold, hard as rocks. I was saving them until I could sit next to her and feel her sweet little thigh nuzzling mine when the first sip of beer went down. What did I see instead? A fellow with his arm around her. Cora was looking at me in pure panic. He was huge. I was big, but this old boy was huge. He had a face you could put up against the bumper of a flatbed truck, and the face alone could push the truck uphill. Susan began to chuckle. I was not demoralized, you understand. I was boss of my own equipment, thank you. So I said, Fella, I don't know if you are aware of this or not, but that happens to be your arm on my girl. Well, he said, what are you planning to do about it? I smiled. I gave a dumb country boy grin like I had nothing to do but get lost. Then I hit him in the face with the bottom end of the full beer can. Him sitting down, me standing up. I hit him with the right arm that did those one-arm push-ups. The end of the beer can indented a circle from the top of his nostrils to the middle of his forehead. It broke his nose and laid vertical cuts over both eyebrows. He looked like a cross between a bat and a hog. We were silent before this memory recollected in tranquility. "How do you think the fellow responded?" Butler asked. "How?" asked Susan. He sat there. He didn't blink particularly, and he didn't move. He just smiled. Then he said, "You want to play? Let's play." "What do you think I said?" "I don't know," she said. "Tell me." I said, "Fella, you can have her. You can have her." I started running. Full pause. I started running, and I haven't stopped since. Susan Pierce laughed as if something in the very scheme of things had just caught on fire. "Oh, golly," she said. "Oh, golly." Then she kissed his cheek. "You're cute. You're such a fool, but do you know you're cute?" Proprietary lust for him appeared in her face. After a few minutes, it was obvious there was nothing more for me to do than say goodnight. On my way to bed, I could find no explanation why his story had appealed so greatly to her. It impressed me, however, that he had told the same story once to a group of us at the farm, and it had had a totally different ending. He had hardly run away. He had stayed and taken the beating of his life against that huge old boy, but afterward he had made love to Cora Lee for all of July and August. I was depressed. I'd had dates with girls like Susan Pierce all through college, and we would drink beers together. Nothing much more. Now he was going to seduce her in one night. Was it because of Berlin? I did not believe girls like Susan would make love that quickly back in America. On such thoughts, I fell asleep. 2 chapters later. It was close to midnight. I felt as if I had 7 hours before the rites of execution would commence. On leaving Harvey's home, therefore, I made a quick decision to find Dick's butler and drink the night through. And the first half of this proposition took considerably less time than the second. Right off, I came upon Dick's in a small club we often frequented off the Kurfürstendamm, a place called Die Hintertour. There was a girl in this back door who would dance and drink with you, and a lady bartender whom Dix liked. She had jet black hair, not an everyday matter in Berlin, even if it was dyed hair, and she offered a look of exceptional sophistication for a small bar with one waiter and not an agent in sight. I judged it was the luxury of being able to drink without an eye on business that brought Dix here, plus Maria, the bartender. He was uncharacteristically polite with her and never tried any more Herculean approach than to ask occasionally if he might see her home, to which she invariably responded with a mysterious smile as a congenial way of saying no. The other girl, Ingrid, had dyed red hair, was available for a dance or for sitting with you and hearing your troubles, and office nicely complimented most evenings by one or another glum German businessman in from Bremen or Dortmund or Mainz. Dependably, such a fellow would buy Ingrid's time for a couple of hours of slow dancing, perfunctory conversation, and heavy silences. She would hold his hand. She would tell stories and occasionally make him laugh. I was invariably impressed with the balance between supply and demand. Almost never was Ingrid free, but such was the tempo of the back door. Seldom were 2 businessmen seeking her company at the same hour. By now, Ingrid was my pal. We flirted between customers, danced a little. She was encouraging to the idea I might improve, and alternately practiced German and English with each other. Occasionally she would ask, "Du liebst mich?" "Ja," I would reply. In a foreign language, it was not difficult to agree that one loved somebody when one did not. In turn, her sharp mouth, primed with all the trade wisdom that love is a gritty condition, spread into a wide and slightly maniacal smile. "Ja," she repeated, and held up her thumb and forefinger 1/8 of an inch apart. "Du liebst mich ein bisschen." She had a gutty voice, which I enjoyed, for she employed it with precision, laying each German word like a template on my cloudy understanding. I eventually learned that Ingrid was married, lived with her husband and child, plus a few cousins and brothers in her mother's apartment, and wanted to get to the United States. Dix told me as much. She's looking to hook an American. All the same, I enjoyed her occasional kiss of congratulation when I showed a little rhythm in my dance. Nor would she take remuneration from me. I was described to the German businessmen as her Schatz. Now that I had become the official sweetheart, I was entitled to hear gossip. Ingrid informed me that Maria was kept by a rich protector. When I relayed this to Dix, he promptly returned a dividend. The gent that Maria shares her apartment with, he said, happens to be a rich, middle-aged woman. That's why I can't score. Why do you try? I'm asking myself. His restlessness ratcheted up another notch. I was deciding that Die Hintertür was too quiet for him tonight, when the door opened and Freddie and Bunny McCann came in. Freddie, middle name Phipps, Princeton, 54, was my replacement at headquarters. Precisely the fellow who had learned my job so quickly, and all because I sometimes thought he was nice. He had put himself in my hands. He had trusted me. It is not difficult to instruct where there is no unhappy question about your motives. So I liked him and his manners. He was even taller than me, but weighed somewhat less. And if he had a shortcoming for certain kinds of company work, it was that he was too obviously an American official. His wife, however, would be even more visible. She had a mane of beautiful dark hair and the loveliest face. Her eyes were blue. I confess she reminded me of Kittredge. In any event, they were much too well-suited a couple to impinge on Dick's butler at this hour. I could see by the tentative look on their marital face as they came over to sit with us that they were disappointed by the lackluster air of the joint, the empty tables, the absence of vice. It was my fault. Freddie had called during the working day to ask if I could recommend a boîte for quiet drinking, a place with a little authentic Berlin mood. Assuring him that no such entity existed. They're all circuses or morgues, I told him. I came around to suggesting the back door where you can at least breathe and speak. The lady bartender might be a novelty, and the girl who's available for dances, I was low enough to brag, pretends to have a crush on me. Well, said Freddie, it certainly sounds authentic. We've been cooped up. Bunny's cousin, Bailey Lawrence, is in the consulate here, and he's just about trapped us on the banquet list. Solemn stuff. When it comes to vulcanizing a chicken, the Germans are quite our equal. In that case, the back door might amuse you, I said. I thought you said it was Die Hintertür. It is, I told him, but they also repeat the name in English, right on the sign. I wish that had warned him off. Never did my favorite, if dim, watering hole look so third-rate. What did you say your name was? Dix asked as soon as Freddie's wife sat down, and repeated, Bunny Bailey McCann. What does Bunny stand for? He asked. Actually, it's Martita. Martita Bailey McCann, a nice name, he said. Thank you. Good to and fro in the consonants. Are you a writer? She asked. Actually, I'm a poet, Dix told her. Do you publish? Only in magazines that look for doggerel. Freddie laughed. I did a bit to join him. What are you drinking? Asked Dix. Scotch, said Freddie, waterside. 2 scotches, Dix called out to Maria. Make it the Scotch from Scotland. Thank you, said Freddie. I suppose they put flavoring in grain alcohol and serve it up if you let them. I don't know, said Dix. I can't drink the stuff. I don't understand Scotch. That's an odd remark, said Freddie. The liquor we put into ourselves is called spirits. I like to know which spirits I'm putting into myself. Terrific, said Fred McCann. I've used the word all my life and never thought about it once. Spirits. I think about them a lot, said Dix. Good for you, said Bunny. He looked at her. Actually, I learned about Scotch the other day in this place, from the bartender over there, Maria. I asked her, "What is it about guys who drink scotch?" And she said, "You do not know?" I said, "I do not know." "Oh," she said, "that is not so hard. Guys who drink scotch have given up." "I suppose the shoe fits," said Freddie McCann after a pause. "Nonsense, darling," said Bunny. "You never give up. Not if it's something worthwhile." She looked at me. Her eyes were clear. They were lovely eyes, and they were asking, "Is this your good friend?" "Well, I don't know," said Freddie, "that I throw a large amount of weight." "You're beautiful, Mrs. McCann," said Dix. "Your husband must be lucky." "Would you believe it if I told you I'm just as lucky?" "I wouldn't," said Dix, "believe it for a minute." Freddie laughed. "Here. Here's the scotch," said Bunny, and drank half of her glass at a gulp. "I think you may as well bring another," she said to the waiter. "Yes," said Freddie, "another round." "In fact, I would go so far," said Dix, "as to say that your husband is bloody fortunate." "I would suggest," said Bunny, "that you shut your trap." Dix knocked off the rest of his bourbon. We sat in silence. "Yes, ma'am, you bet," he said into the silence. When no one replied, his unanswered presence began to use up more of our oxygen. "You bet what?" she said. He was not about to give up. "I bet you and me," he said to her, "could drink those two under the table." "I would bet the heaviest drinkers in the world come out of Dartmouth," Freddie said. I had to honor him for trying. "I met one fellow in Hanover at the Princeton-Dartmouth game my sophomore year who used to drink so much that I don't believe he had any mental faculties left, except, that is, for the more basic motor functions. His fraternity brothers used to take exams for him so he could remain in school and win bets when they got into drinking contests with the other fraternities. I saw him again last year, and he was gone." "Pal," said Dix, "you've written your letter. Mail it." Freddie McCann did his best to laugh. I could see he still had some outside hope that Dix might be part of the authentic ambience in this bar. "Would you mind if I danced with your wife?" Dix asked. "I believe it's up to her." "She'll say no." "You're absolutely right," said Bunny. "No, fellow, your wife doesn't want to dance with me. It could become a habit." "Now, what are you trying to tell me?" said Freddie. "That you're fucking fortunate." "Enough," I said. "No, Harry," said Fred, I can speak for myself." "I don't hear you very well," said Dix. "This is becoming a little implausible," said Fred McCann. "I ask you to remember, there are Germans here. We are supposed to set an example." "I think your wife has the most gorgeous hair," said Dix, and he ran his hand, not quickly, but not so slowly that she could react in time, from her brow to the nape of her neck. I stood up. "All right," I said. "You can apologize, Dix." "To my friends." It is odd, but at that moment there seemed no physical punishment I might have to suffer which could prove equal to watching Dix Butler beat Fred McCann